We also look forward on really every Wednesday in talking with Andrew Reinhart, don't we, Dave?
Yeah, always look forward to our time with Andrew Reinhart in this brand new segment, Becoming Gift. Welcome, Andrew. Can't wait to hear your thoughts for today.
Yeah.
Well, good morning.
Evidently, you have music, Andrew.
Yeah, and when you of course, you're the host of a podcast, Physically Spiritual, and always bring some insights for us. And today we're talking about faith and reason.
We're talking about faith and reason. Yes, this is kind of a foundational idea for everything I want to talk about. This relationship between faith and reason is often presented in our society as like these contrary ideas. They're at war and people sort of make up these historical myths about how the church is anti-science or anti-reason.
Right.
This is what Pope St. John Paul II said in his encyclical Fides et Ratio, which is literally faith and reason.
Right.
It says, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. And God has placed in the human heart a desire to know the truth, in a word, to know himself. Mm-hmm. This idea of the two wings, this obviously beautiful image of, such a pope who was a poet in his own right.
Yeah.
But this idea, it's really a modern misunderstanding that faith and reason are at odds.
Yes.
It really kind of comes out of an early modernity that doesn't really represent Christendom. Mm-hmm. There's, I think, two extremes in our society that typify this. One would be a kind of leap of faith idea, right? That, to believe you just sort of have to jump off a cliff.
Right, yeah.
But the Catholic idea, faith is always reasonable, meaning that faith builds on reason, faith uses our reason. And, this might be typified by certain Christian denominations that literally refuse medical care.
True.
Because they believe they just need to completely trust in the Lord with their health, and so they shouldn't go to the hospital or take medicine or something like that. There's another extreme that reduces reason in a similar way called scientism.
Right.
And this is really the reduction or truncation of reason to be just what's measurable, just what sort of what the scientific method might test. But in both cases, in both of these extremes, it's really taking something broad and inclusive and making it something narrow and inclusive. So our church always taught that there's a harmony between faith and reason. This is what the Catechism says, that though faith is above reason, there can never be any real discrepancy between faith and reason, since the same God who reveals mysteries and infuses faith has bestowed the light of reason on the human mind. God cannot deny himself, nor can truth ever contradict truth.
Right.
So in this idea of reason, we have to make it broader. It's not just science. It's, even things like poetry and literature and, these sort of stories that point to deeper realities. All this is part of reason, part of the university, part of our classical studies.
Yeah.
But also faith is bigger than just belief in God. Day to day, we are all constantly operating on a kind of natural faith. Just driving.
Right.
Driving wouldn't be possible without faith.
Mm-hmm.
You have faith that those other drivers are going to stay in their lane, that they're going to stop at the stop sign, that they're going to follow the rules of the road. And we're constantly sort of operating on this natural faith. Faith that people love us, faith that what's behind the wall isn't going to kill us. Right? Just faith is just an ordinary part of the operation of the mind.
Yep, it is.
Now, we, of course, believe as Catholics we have supernatural faith, that we receive this theological virtue that makes our mind sort of divinized. It makes us see reality how God would see it and gives it as an experience of something that's beyond our reason's capacity. But in all of this, as Catholics, as we're thinking about the world and engaging with science and engaging with, just people whom maybe don't believe, we don't have to have a posture of fear or a posture of timidity like, some scientist is going to discover something that's going to disprove God. Like the famous cosmonaut that went into orbit and said, I don't see God up here.
Right.
It's just silly.
Yeah.
It's just silly. Or the famous atheist who called God the flying spaghetti monster.
Right.
This is just silliness in our faith.
Yeah.
So we don't have to be afraid of what science might discover, and just know that all of this can be brought up into our faith if it is true and if it is good.
Yeah. There are two things, Andrew, I want to just give to you and see what you do with this. But one is kind of the movement away from classical education to STEM, which is all very technology sciencey. And the other is without reason, faith can turn into cults.
Amen.
So, is that shift into like STEM, which is the big thing nowadays, is that part of that modernity, that movement away from a deeper understanding?
It definitely is. These themes of modernity, things like the fact that creation is sort of neutral, that nature is neutral, and so we can just sort of use it as we want, right? So that the way to sort of make progress is to generate more power in order to manipulate this sort of neutral stuff that's out there. And that's the kind of idea that we're going to save ourselves through scientific progress. We're going to sort of master the natural world in order to make of it what we want. Mm-hmm. But I think history is evidence enough to say the problem is really the human heart.
Yeah.
Right? If we can't use things well, more doesn't solve anything. If we can't use things well, more doesn't solve anything.
Yeah.
Right? So this sort of progress in STEM, in engineering and technology, and our ability to sort of master nature, right? Without virtue, we're just going to create more problems.
Exactly.
So this is where all of our scientific pursuits need to be grounded in philosophy, but also in the humanities.
Right.
This is why they all receive PhDs, philosophical doctorates.
Right.
Because all these fields were guided and grounded in philosophy as its guiding principles, in order that we could actually use this power well, in order to improve what's been given to us.
As one philosopher said to me, it depends on what philosophy you're working from.
Amen. Amen. And this is the beauty of why faith and reason are so important for one another.
Yes.
Because we need theology to take our philosophy to the next level, to direct it and guide it. There's a science above philosophy, and that's the study of God. So by seeking the Lord, right, it brings everything else beneath it within order.
Yeah.
And we've flipped it on its head. Right? We have the most basic kind of things at the bottom of the pyramid driving the whole bus. And what you see then is everything sort of falls apart in the wake.
Yeah. And go ahead.
I just want to say real quickly, Andrew, we're called to have an answer for the hope that lies within us, right? And this becomes a little more complicated, but the fact is we get attacked on this level over and over and over again as Catholics as being anti-science and all that. What is the 30-second, and then we really have to have it, that 30-second first initial response to that attack?
I think one is the example of our life, right? If we're living a life that's fully reasonable, that we're integrating insights from the best of science into our life, that we're living the example of it. But I think also from a more intellectual side, Bishop Barron hit the nail on the head when he did the Catholicism series, because he went forward with that series making the claim that we need to start telling our story.
Yep.
Right? We shouldn't accept the modern myths about history, in sort of these founding myths in our society that they just aren't accurate according to what we know of our own faith and our own history as a church.
Right.
So we need to start telling our own story.
Yeah. That's true. Very true. And I think that, St. John Paul, that, two wings of a bird, right? I mean, I always tell my students, if you don't have one of those, you're just flying in circles. And I think that's so true, right? I mean, but it is, people have a hard time seeing those two exist together.
They do. And it's a tricky thing. We're not walking into clear-cut answers all the time. So you have to be willing to continue to strive and seek and move toward the Lord. And that's really the journey.
Yeah. Oh, gosh,
Wow.
Great. That's wonderful, Andrew. Good stuff.
Becoming gift.
Yeah.
Faith and reason. I don't know why it vexes us so much, because it's really cut and dried.